Thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome up our fellow final panelists to the stage. So I'm pleased today to have Sulton Rahimzoda. He is the special envoy of the President of Tajikistan for the Water and Climate Coalition Leaders, as well as chairman of the Executive Committee of the International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea. Welcome. Now, as many of you know, Tajikistan is co-hosting the UN Water Conference alongside the Netherlands. The Dutch are, of course, pretty well known for their flood management projects, given that they are such a low-lying area, but Tajikistan is not as readily associated with water issues. So it kind of begs the obvious question here, why Tajikistan for the water conference?
Thank you, Anna, for inviting me. So first of all, water for Tajikistan is strategic resource. It's not only the source of our economic development, but also source of national security. Because we don't have the fuel and gas, and that's why 98% of our electricity comes from water. We rank 6 in the world in terms of the using renewable resources of energy. The second, Tajikistan is a developing country, and we have been facing a lot of challenges to use these resources effectively for the benefit of the country. That's why first time when we initiated the International Year of Fresh Water, it was 1999. The idea behind of this initiative was to attract the attention of the world community, to know about Tajikistan, to know about our challenge, and to find the support of the donors countries, international community for Tajikistan to address this challenge. But time has shown that Tajikistan has received multiple effects from these processes. Of course, we did attraction of the world community to our country, but also to water resources. The second moment, we could attract the support of the development partners to address those challenges we have in the country. And the third one, I think it's a political benefit of the country. If 25 years ago, I could ask many of you, where is Tajikistan? Maybe many of you couldn't even answer. But today, Tajikistan is co-chairing very historical and ambitious conference in the world. And indeed, through these processes, we also learned a lot from the international experience, and that's why we started already to adjust the water governance inside of our country based on the IWR and based on the international standards and principles. And in 2015, the government of Tajikistan endorsed the National Water Sector Reform Program, to make this kind of change in the country to have more benefit and to address those challenges we have been facing.
And now on that note, you've touched on the water reforms in your 2030 strategy. Can you talk a bit more about some of the examples of what reforms are happening on the ground? What are some of the results you're seeing, and also what are some of the challenges you've encountered?
Yeah, indeed. Initial idea behind the water sector reform was two. First, it's to implement the international standard, especially the principles of integrated water resources management inside of the country. And the second one, splitting the functions on policy and regulatory between, from the operation and maintenance. Until 2015, we had one ministry basically engaged in all these issues, and it was not enough basically, to do the policy and regulatory issues. And the second moment is transition to integrated water resources management based on the basin approach. So until now, we already created 5 river basin organizations, river basin councils. For 3 basins, we already developed the river basin plans, which assess basically the current situation within those basins and recommended or provided the action plan how to address those challenges on the basin level.
And now, we talk about challenges. Of course, one of the main ones that we've been discussing all day is climate change. Can you talk about how that has impacted the reforms and the projects, and how you've been forced to adapt over the years?
Basically, we are a mountainous country and very prone to the impacts of the climate change. Our honorable president yesterday at the opening of a ceremony of this conference mentioned that we already lost around 1,000 of our glaciers. Basically, we had 14,000 of the glaciers covering 8% of the territory of the country. We're providing around 60% of the water resources of the Aral basin. And this tendency, I mean, that we already lost around 30% of the volume of our glaciers, which means that in the future, in the midterm, long-term future, it brings to the reducing of the water flows, which will impact in line with the population growth, of course. The situation will be very serious. And I mean, the changing our governance, transition from administrative body to basin boundaries, to manage water resources, it was basically also based on the taking into account the effects of the climate change, which causes a lot of basically damage in our economy, undermining our efforts to achieve sustainable development. And within the water sector reform also, we changed our laws. We developed the new water code for the Tajikistan. We updated and adopted the new national law on drinking water supply and sanitation. We adopted the new law on water user association. All these changes had been done taking into account this challenge and to make our system, water resources management system, sustainable, addressing those challenges, including the climate change in our country.
Now, of course, there has to be some role for the private sector to have a systematic approach to WASH issues. But as we've been hearing, it's not generally an attractive investment, WASH issues. What kind of incentives do you think can be offered to appeal to the private sector?
That is really still one of the challenging issues in my country. We have only maybe a few examples where the private sector are engaged in a water sector in Tajikistan. When I talked about the changing of the national legislation, including the adoption of the new law on drinking water supply and sanitation in 2019, before 2019, the national legislation, national law didn't allow us to involve private sector, I mean, that in drinking water supply subsector. And then changing this law, we could basically attract attention and to bring the private sector, I mean, that at least, I mean, the regulatory, it is now possible, but because of the tariff is very low, unfortunately, and of course the attraction of the business community and private sector is still very challenging. But the government of Tajikistan, through the change in the regulatory and also providing incentives, including through the tax measures and etc., so are trying now to provide this kind of opportunity for private sector to be engaged in. One of the examples of this also, it's a PPP models, public-private partnership, and those few projects we have now in my country, it's a PPP projects. Very fortunately, we can say that in drinking water supplies, they are effective, and we are looking now, looking forward to have more projects in drinking water supply system. The same, so we are working also in irrigation system. Indeed, for hydropower, which is the major part of energy sector of the country, it's too attractive, so the private sector is ready to be engaged in the hydropower. But when you're talking again about the irrigation and drinking water supply, it's a little bit challenging. But the government is doing many things, I mean, they're providing this kind of incentives to bring them on the board to help to be in, I mean, to support the country in these sectors.
Now, Tajikistan, just like all countries, shares its water resources with its neighbors. How would you describe water wash cooperation in Central Asia?
Uh, Water resources management in Central Asia, it's very specific because more than 80% of water resources are being originated or formed in the territory of the two upstream countries, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, while the 85% of water resources being used by the downstream countries, by Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. And the problem and challenge is the interests of the upstream and downstream countries are different. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, where the more than 90% of water of the electricity comes from hydropower, from water, they are interested to use these water resources mostly during the winter time when the demand for electricity is very high. But for the downstream countries, they are interested to use this water during the summertime for the benefit of irrigation. Without proper cooperation, it would be very complicated, of course, to manage this issue in the region. That's why in 1993, the countries of the region created the International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea, the organization which is dealing for water resources management and environmental issue. And currently, Tajikistan is chairing in the fund, and in parallel, I'm chairman of this executive committee of the International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea. So we have been providing for these 30 years the platform for dialogue and cooperation for the countries of the region. And back early in 90s, many experts, basically, they were forecasting or saying that the water will be one of the potential source of conflict in the region. But fortunately, because of the willingness of the governments of the region, because of this platform, we could manage this issue without any serious conflict, without any, that big or tough, complicated relationship between the countries. So providing this. And of course, Tajikistan was among the countries created this fund and being very active within this platform. Based on the main principles that water should be source of peace and cooperation in the region.
And now we've talked about your neighbors as well as the private sector. What about other stakeholders in the process, such as civil society? How is Tajikistan working to incorporate other stakeholders into these efforts?
In terms of the bringing different stakeholders in water resources management system, within the water sector reform, I already mentioned that we created river basin organizations and river basin councils. So the river basin council is a platform to bring together different stakeholders on the level of the basin to come together to discuss those challenges they are facing, and also to make a contribution and input for the decision makers in terms of how to move forward. This is a case of the basin level. On the national level, we have also national policy dialogue. It's a platform bringing together different stakeholders, the government and the development partners together to discuss basically what is the gap, what is the progress achieved, and to define, the ways how to move forward to address those challenges we have.
Now, as the conference co-host, I know you've been pretty busy probably running around. What are some of the positive things you've seen, some of the things you would still like to see? We've got one more day left. What are some of your takeaways?
As co-host of the conference, of course, we are delighted to welcome all of you here in New York and joining, this historical and ambitious conference. When we started our collaborative works with our Dutch friends and colleagues from the UN system toward this conference, we decided that the preparatory conference and the conference itself should be based on three main principles: inclusivity, cross-sectorality, and action-oriented. So in terms of inclusiveness, we did our best to involve all interested parties, different stakeholders, starting from the farmers on the ground until the high-level political leaders in this process, leaving no one behind. The second moment is cross-sectorality, and we understand that basically water sits at the core of the sustainable development. And yesterday also Secretary General of the UN mentioned that it's not a conference about water. Also, it is the water conference, but it's much beyond water, because water is source of our life. Water is source of the energy, source of food. It's a source for the environment, sustainability, for peace and security and stability and development, of course. That's why, I mean, bringing together different stakeholders in nexus approach, in integrated approach, will have multiple benefit for that. And the third one, action-oriented. So based on the existing assessments, we know that our action, unfortunately, up to now, is not enough. So we need to quadruple our efforts and actions to achieve SDG 6 and other water-related goals by 2030. That's why we have been calling the international community to come to the conference with commitments, bold, strong, innovative, transformative commitments to accelerate actions to achieve SDG 6 and other water-related goals. And therefore, we are delighted to see that today, I guess it's more than 600 commitments are already registered in the Water Action Agenda, which is a major outcome of this conference. And that means also the involvement of different stakeholders in this process. We are very delighted to see that different stakeholders, they are committed for water. And our message to the world community, basically, let's be united for water. Really, water deserves to be duly respected, valued, and better managed, of course. Second is, let's be committed for action. Without actions, we will not be able to achieve those goals and targets we have ahead of us. And the third one, it's just, let's be united to make this conference a watershed moment for the world. It's really a historical moment for us because it's the second one in the history, and we don't have another 50 years to wait another conference to take action to achieve our goals. Let's use this chance, had been given to us. It's big responsibility, but I think everybody understands that using this chance, this opportunity rightly, we will be able to achieve the success. Otherwise, the next generation will not forgive us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that's a great thought and warning at the same time to end on. Thank you, Sultan.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.